It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. A young couple, deeply in love, stepping into the wild beauty of Alaska for the very first time, mountains stretching into the clouds, rivers cutting through untouched forests, and a silence so deep, it feels sacred. Tessa Sullivan and Finn Hoffman weren't thrill seekers or survival experts, but they weren't naive either. From Oregon, both in their late 20s, they were the kind of people who planned their hikes, packed their gear carefully, and always checked in. They had jobs, families who loved them, and a future they were building together. On September 12, 2022, they left their cabin at the Kenai River Lodge with nothing but backpacks, a guidebook, and the promise to check out by noon. They never came back. The lodge manager, Brenda, didn't think much of it at first. Tourists lose track of time, especially when the trails are calling. But when the hours passed and their key still sat on the counter, she went to check cabin 7. What she found wasn't abandonment, it was interruption. Toothbrushes still in the cup, jackets on chairs, suitcases packed but never taken. And outside, the parking spot where their gray Ford Escape should have been, was empty. No note, no call, no sign they ever came back from that hike. By the next day, the Alaska State Troopers were involved. A missing persons case. 2 city folks who might have taken a wrong turn, underestimated the wilderness, or fallen victim to the unpredictable dangers of the Alaskan wild bears, cliffs, freezing rivers. That's what everyone assumed. That's what made sense. But nothing about this story makes sense. For weeks, search teams combed the forests. Helicopters scanned the treetops. Dogs sniffed through thick brush. Families waited by phones. The media picked up the story. Young couple missing in Alaska, and for a while, it felt like it might end with a miracle. Maybe they'd been injured, lost, surviving off berries and sheer will, until someone found them. But the days turned into weeks, then months. Winter came fast and brutal, burying the land under snow. By October, the official search was called off. The case went cold. People moved on, and somewhere, deep in the woods, the truth stayed hidden. Then, 9 months later, on a quiet morning in June 2023, a park ranger named Elias Vance was doing a routine check on a bear bait station deep in the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge. These stations are legal, meant to lure bears away from populated areas during hunting season. But what Vance found wasn't just illegal, it was horrifying. In a mossy clearing, a massive blue barrel lay on its side, spilling out a rotting mountain of donuts, pastries, and corn, thousands of them. A cloud of flies buzzed over the mess. The smell was sickly sweet, like spoiled bakery goods left in the sun. But beneath that, something else, something darker, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He stepped closer, and that's when he saw them. 2 black hiking boots, sticking straight up out of the sludge inside the barrel. Attached to legs, Vance didn't touch anything. He backed away, radioed for help, and waited. When the troopers arrived, they pulled a body from the barrel fully clothed, decomposed, but unmistakably human. The gear was caked in mud and slime, but the boots, the pants, the jacket, it all matched the description of what Finn Hoffman was wearing the last time anyone saw him. Dental records later confirmed it. This was Finn, but the cause of death. Not exposure, not an animal attack. Blunt force trauma to the back of the head. He'd been murdered, and here's where it gets even more disturbing. The forensic report dropped. A bombshell. Finn's body hadn't been rotting in that barrel for 9 months. Only a few weeks. The rest of the time, it had been frozen, preserved, hidden somewhere cold like a freezer through the entire Alaskan winter. Someone had killed him in September, stored his body like meat, and only recently dumped it in the woods, buried under a mountain of donuts, as if hoping the bears would eat the evidence. The idea is chilling. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was calculated, cold, deliberate. And if Finn was murdered and hidden, what about Tessa? That question haunted the investigators. Was she a victim too? Had she somehow survived? Or worse, was she involved? The theories swirled. The public couldn't look away. This wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. It was a murder mystery wrapped in wilderness, isolation, and silence. The troopers went back to work, reopening the case with a fury. They traced the pastries to a bakery in Anchorage. They found a faded stamp on the barrel from a seafood plant that hadn't existed in over a decade. Every clue felt like a puzzle piece from a different picture. Until one day, 2 fishermen out on a remote lake noticed something glinting under the water. They leaned in, squinting through the clear, icy depths, and saw the roof of a car, a gray Ford Escape, the same one Tessa and Finn had rented. It had been sitting at the bottom of the lake for nearly a year. When they pulled it out, soaked and covered in weeds, the real breakthrough came. The GPS system was damaged, but not dead. Forensic techs managed to recover the last recorded data, and it changed everything, because the GPS showed the car never went to the Slaughter Gulch Trail, the place they were supposedly hiking. Instead, it turned onto a series of unmarked logging roads, winding deeper into the wilderness, ending right at the edge of that remote lake. They had driven there on purpose, or someone had. Investigators started digging into who owned the land nearby, and they found a name. Alistair Finch, a 68-year-old man who lived completely off the grid. No phone, no internet, no contact with neighbors. Just a cabin deep in the woods, paid for in cash 20 years ago. Locals said he was paranoid, reclusive, and had a reputation for not liking visitors. When troopers raided his property, they found an empty chest, freezer recently cleaned, but still glowing blue under luminol tests, a telltale sign of blood. And in a locked storage locker, hidden behind tarps, was a turquoise backpack. Inside, a wallet, and inside that, a driver's license. Tessa Sullivan. They brought Finch in, and after months of silence, he finally spoke. He told them how Finn and Tessa had gotten stuck on his property, how he'd told them to leave, how Finn had stepped toward him, how he swung the rifle, how he dragged Finn's body to the freezer, how he drove their car into the lake, how he kept Tessa locked in his cabin for months, and how, one spring day, she escaped into the woods. But the final chapter hasn't been written yet, because when the search teams went back, following the direction Finch said she ran, they didn't find her alive. They found her remains, months later, tucked under the roots of a fallen tree, in a shelter she'd built with her own hands. She had survived for days, maybe longer, on her own, in the freezing wild, with no food, no gear, no hope, and in the end, the wilderness she came to see took her anyway. This is a story about love, adventure, and the kind of isolation that can twist a mind until it breaks. It's about how one wrong turn can lead to a nightmare, and it's about how, sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the wild isn't the wilderness, it's the person waiting in it. When the news broke that Finn's body had been found in that barrel, frozen, hidden, then dumped like trash, people couldn't believe it. How does something like that happen in the middle of nowhere, under the radar, for 9 whole months? And who was capable of doing it? The FBI wasn't involved. This wasn't a serial killer on the run or some cartel hit. This was something quieter, darker, something that grew in silence, like mold in a forgotten corner. The more the troopers dug, the more it became clear this wasn't just about a murder. It was about a man who had already disappeared long before anyone ever went looking for him. Alistair Finch hadn't always been a ghost. Records showed he was born in Wisconsin, worked as a mechanical engineer, had a wife named Clara, and a daughter, Emily, who would have been 8 when they died. A head-on collision on an icy road back in 2003. Drunk driver. He survived. They didn't. That was the last time anyone saw him in the lower 48. A year later, he bought 120 acres of untouched forest near Tusama Lake with a cashier's check for $98,000. No loan, no questions. He built a cabin by hand. No power lines, no well, just solar panels, a wood stove, and a life measured in silence. Neighbors, if you could call them that, said he never waved, never made small talk. Once, a hiker trespassed on his land by accident, just walked through, took a photo, left. Finch showed up at the man's campsite that night with a rifle and told him never to come back. The guy filed a report, but nothing came of it. Back then, it was just seen as Alaska being Alaska, a little rough around the edges. Now, that story looked like a warning sign no one had read. But here's the thing about isolation: it doesn't just change your habits, it warps your mind. You stop hearing human voices, and after a while, you start hearing threats in the wind. You see danger in a car stuck in the mud. To most people, Tessa and Finn were just lost tourists, maybe a little over their heads. But to Finch, they were an invasion. His world was small, controlled, predictable. And then, out of nowhere, 2 strangers show up on his land, asking for help, talking too loud, not understanding the unspoken rules. In his mind, they weren't looking for a phone or a tow. They were testing him, probing. And when Finn stepped forward, angry and desperate, Finch didn't see a grieving fiancé, he saw a threat. And he reacted the way a cornered animal does, with violence. The troopers found more in the cabin after the arrest, not just Tessa's backpack, but journals. Dozens of them, filled with cramped, obsessive handwriting. Pages and pages about the outsiders, the noise, the corruption of the modern world. He wrote about how the government was watching, how drones flew over at night, how every car on the logging road was a scout for something bigger coming. He had maps with red circles around every trail, every access point, and in one of them, dated September 9, 2022, he wrote, *, they came today. 2 of them thought they could just walk in. I stopped them. I had to, now I'm trapped with what I did. That entry wasn't remorse, it was resignation, like he'd always known this day would come. And then there was Tessa. What must it have been like for her, locked in that cabin, knowing her fiancé was dead, knowing the man who killed him was just on the other side of the door? Finch said he fed her, that he never touched her, but the fear alone would have been torture. The silence, the waiting, the sound of the freezer humming in the shed every night, the thing holding Finn's body just yards away. She wasn't just a prisoner, she was living inside a crime scene. And when she finally ran, she didn't run towards safety. She ran deeper into the wild, with no coat, no food, no compass, just the will to survive. Search teams later found traces of her path, broken branches, a scrap of blue fabric caught on a thorn bush, the remains of a small fire made from damp wood that barely smoked. She tried, she fought, she even built that shelter under the roots of the fallen tree, like she was trying to disappear into the earth itself. But Alaska doesn't care how brave you are. One night, the temperature dropped, the wind picked up, and she didn't wake up the next morning. Back in Oregon, Tessa's mom still sets the table for two every Sunday. Finn's brother keeps his hiking boots by the door, like he might walk in any second. They were good people. They didn't do anything wrong. They just took a wrong turn on a muddy road and ended up in a nightmare that had been building for 20 years. And Finch, he sits in a cell now. No windows, no trees, no silence. Guards check on him every hour. He doesn't talk, doesn't write, just stares at the wall. Maybe he thinks about that moment, the swing of the rifle, the sound it made when it connected. Or maybe he's still back in Wisconsin, holding his daughter's hand as they cross the street. We'll never know. But here's what haunts me the most. If that gas station camera hadn't failed, if the troopers had found the car in October, if someone had reported seeing a man dumping donuts in the woods, could any of this have been stopped? Or was it always going to end like this? Because the truth is, we like to think monsters are easy to spot, but sometimes, they're just a man who stopped talking to the world. Until the world came knocking, and when it did, he wasn't ready to answer when they found Tessa's remains tucked under that fallen spruce, curled up like she was trying to stay warm one last time. Something in all of us broke a little. It wasn't just the brutality of it, was the quietness. No dramatic rescue, no last words, just silence, cold earth, and the slow return to the forest. She had fought the shelter, the scattered berry stems, the broken branches showing where she'd crawled. She didn't give up. But Alaska doesn't reward courage with miracles. Sometimes, it just takes, and it took her, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but bones and the echo of a life that should have had so much more time. Alistair Finch's trial was quiet. Almost too quiet for something so horrific. No outbursts, no tears. He sat, in court, like a man already dead, staring at the floor as the evidence was laid out: the GPS data, the freezer that once held a murdered man, the turquoise backpack that belonged to a woman he kept prisoner for months. The prosecutor called it premeditated. The defense didn't even try to argue. Finch had pleaded guilty. He didn't want a trial. He didn't want sympathy. He just wanted it to be over. And when the judge sentenced him to life without parole, he nodded, like it was the only sentence that made sense. But here's the thing that stays with me. The moment that still haunts me when I think about this story. It wasn't the barrow. It wasn't the frozen body, or the car at the bottom of the lake. It was the donuts. Thousands of them, dumped like trash, meant to hide a man's body from bears. Who does that? Who thinks that far ahead, yet is so broken inside that he can't see how wrong it all is? He wasn't some mastermind. He was just a man who lost everything, then lost himself. And when two strangers showed up on his land, asking for help, he didn't see people. He saw a threat. And in that moment, something snapped. Tessa and Finn didn't die because they were reckless. They didn't die because they weren't prepared. They died because they got too close to a wound they couldn't see. One wrong turn on a muddy road, one car stuck in the mud, and their whole future vanished. And the worst part, it could have been anyone. It could have been me. It could have been you. We all think we're careful. We all think we know how to handle the wild. But the real danger isn't always the bear in the woods. Sometimes, it's the man who's already lost his mind and just wants to be left alone. Back in Oregon, Tessa's mom still keeps her daughter's favorite mug on the shelf. Finn's brother still hikes the same trails they used to do together. They don't do it because it's easy. They do it because it's the only way they know how to remember. And sometimes, when the wind is just right and the trees are quiet, they say it feels like they're not alone. I think about that a lot. About how two people can disappear into the wilderness and leave behind such a loud silence. About how one man's pain can destroy so many lives. And about how, in the end, the only thing stronger than fear is love, the kind that makes you pack a bag, hit the road, and chase the horizon with someone you can't imagine living without. This story isn't just about a missing couple. It's about what happens when isolation turns to obsession, when grief becomes a prison, and when kindness, like stopping to help strangers on a muddy road, becomes the most dangerous thing you could ever do. If there's one thing to take away, it's this: check in on the people around you, even the quiet ones, even the ones who say they're fine, because sometimes, the person who seems the most distant is the one who's already screaming inside. And sometimes, the wilderness isn't out there in the trees and snow. It's in the human heart.